This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So I did that video the other day, kind of dealing with the idea that for sure I can totally understand why as a consumer, and this is something I've thought about myself, when people ask, would you recommend certain things? It gets to the point at the end of or I guess in this case, a speculative end of a product life cycle, where you think, if I were to buy this product now, is there going to be a new one immediately after that supersedes it? So you think about other kind of tech industries, something like the Xbox, you know, you have different generations of Xbox and they don't necessarily tell you, or maybe they do in the tech world, I don't know, maybe they do, but it would cannibalize sales of their existing technology if they let you know clearly in advance when the new thing was going to drop, right? And to some extent, I think we're at the stage where the Helix is nearing kind of 8 years old, and you think that presumably hardware and DSP chips, all these things have made advances in that time. And I think there is definitely, for me, and possibly for you, let me know in the comments if this is you, we have kind of recency bias, and certainly in the modeling world, the pervasive message is more or less that the newer technology is better than the older technology. And certain amounts of hype kind of are generated, whether it's through channels on YouTube that are paid to demo gear. Some of it could be organic, people that are genuinely enthused by the gear. But we've seen things like the Neural DSP Quad Cortex come up, and there was a certain amount of Helix users that said, ooh, I'm going to jump onto that. We've seen things like the Fractal FM9, the FM3 come out, and you've seen people go, ooh, and they've been enticed by these ideas, or AXFX3. Now, Fractal actually, I think, sit in a slightly different bracket because they are, in a way, quite responsible for the way that the Line 6 Helix actually was developed, and the actual Line 6 developers have said as much. Fractal were kind of one of these companies that at the start made the idea of a more expensive modeler. They created this market for it in a lot of ways that would get ongoing updates for free. Yeah, and I think a product life cycle for Fractal is something like 4 to 5 years, where you get meaningful updates, and then they tend to bring out a new hardware unit. Although with the AXFX 3, for example, they had the AXFX 3 soon after they brought out the Mark II, and then again I think there's a Mark III now, and likewise with the FM9 they brought out the Turbo, because I think of a shortage of chips in some ways. In any case, you get the idea. The new thing is always presumed to be the better thing. Now, in some cases, I don't think we should care about that as guitar players, Because, and we can see a clear example of this, if you think about what can't the Line 6 Helix do and frame it in that way, so if you're a guitarist and you're trying to do stuff with your gear, instead of necessarily thinking about what is newest, maybe you think about actual feature sets and what the thing can do. Because if you actually compare side by side these units, there are real quality of life, actual things that the Helix can do that certainly the Quad Cortex at this stage cannot do. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't ever be able to do this. It's just that you can't buy a product, I don't think, sensibly with it in mind that in the future it will be able to do this thing that you need right now. So, for example, in the Helix, changing foot switches and the functions, switching parameters with a foot switch easily, customizing the foot switches, giving them labels, changing the colors of the foot switches. I'm saying foot switches a lot. Reverse delays, interesting loopers, character delays, character effects, PC editor, also the ability to run exactly the same algorithms as the hardware within the VST. That is actually, I think, one of the biggest achievements of Line 6 that really is a little bit undersold, because to be able to run this exact stuff within your workstation as well does really mean that you can have the same tones, or pretty much the same tones, in your workstation as well as on the floor. Now, people have been waiting for Neural to sort this plug-in thing out and be able to port these things for a couple of years now. Fractal have never really made it clear that their intention to get into the VST game, I think, aside from their reverb plugin. So there is this kind of area, and then you think about, well, what could the Quad Cortex do that the Helix couldn't do? Well, there's like pretty much one thing. It's the capture thing, right? And maybe you don't have a touchscreen, maybe you don't have wireless technology. So if you go for the kind of technology side of things and you think, right, I just really want the most up-to-date thing which has a touchscreen and has the fastest chips, that's a way of buying gear. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter if you've got the most up-to-date chips if you can't do all the things that you could do on a competitor's piece of hardware. For sure, something like the Axefx, the FM9, way more flexible units, way more models, way more drives, a more flexible grid. You know, the list of things that you could do in a Fractal unit, you know, LFOs, sequencers, all this sort of stuff. Maybe not the most up-to-date chips, although the Fractal stuff is pretty modern as far as I'm aware. Would you jump from that ship for the new piece of technology, knowing that it would be quite a step back in terms of how much that company has actually developed for the hardware? You know, like for example, the Quad Cortex came to market without a looper, and they were without a looper for about a year and a half. I don't know, I see people that made the decision, and some people are super happy with the Quad Cortex as well, don't get me wrong. Some people have not been happy with the Helix. There's all of this kind of stuff to mix it up. I just don't know whether you should actually care so much whether the technology is new, when it actually really matters what the developers are doing with the existing technology. You know, like the hardware, you can't develop new hardware all the time necessarily, and you can get plenty of stuff out of existing hardware, as the Helix is showing. I think the Helix and the Kemper show that maybe we shouldn't care about the newest hardware as much as YouTube videos and marketing might tell us we should, because clearly if the DSP engineers put their minds to it, you can still make meaningful and real upgrades to a unit even 8-10 years into the life cycle of the thing. I don't know, maybe that's what we should be thinking about a bit more, possibly. And that's also, I think, getting away a bit from what I think is partly the negative part of this digital modeling space, is that there's this consumable consumer element to it where you think, well, the newest thing is always better. So, you know, presumably if they brought out a new Helix, instead of developing on the existing one, you'd have a load of waste. Whereas if you can get real DSP gains out of existing hardware for the planet, I guess that's a better thing as well, right?
So I guess my point is that really, if we're playing gear, buying gear, if the thing does the job that you need it to do right now, I think that's a better argument for sticking with older technology, and hopefully, like the Line 6 Helix, continues to get better because of the work DSP engineers are doing on this thing. The next update is never really promised, and that's kind of the point, right? So you could buy the newest technology with it in mind that they will improve it, and their intent could very much be to improve it, and I'm sure it is, but the future isn't certain for any device. And for that reason, I don't necessarily think that we should care that the Helix is old, because a couple of weeks ago they brought out a release that made it, I think, better sounding than ever, fully featured. There's really nothing that I can think of except for things like touchscreens, maybe LFOs and sequencers and that sort of stuff, and MIDI syncing. There's a few little bits, let me know yours in the comments, that the Helix can't do and maybe never will be able to do, but as of right now it stacks up really well with the competitors, and there's not one unit out there that goes, obviously sticks out to me, that goes, well, the Helix can't do any of this, it's obviously inferior. I don't know if you feel the same way, let me know your thoughts. I have most of these other units, I have a Quad Cortex, I have the Fractal units, so I have no reason to tell you this other than I think it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about and consider, especially when I get comments from folks occasionally saying these DSP chips are ancient. Does it really matter? You know, Pat Metheny's out there gigging a Kemper, Guthrie Govan was gigging one for ages. These things, they kind of all sound within a ballpark. It's time to start using things probably. And I guess what I mean is there's not been one unit that has come out and there's been enough of a leap forward technology wise to make it clear that now the Helix is outdated. I don't think anything has blown it out of the water yet or made it outdated. That could happen one day, but I'm not sure that it's happened yet. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Grab this John Cordy merch if you want.